Well, I guess we're going to be talking about DeadSide, and it only dropped a month ago with its 1.0 release. Dimension, what do you think about DeadSide? Have you played it at all?
I actually just recently started playing it. It feels a bit like some of the other games we play, but it was an interesting take on the open world survival, player versus everything aspect of survival games.
Yeah, I didn't necessarily get that, and I'll tell you why. I got someone tried to make a survival game and they got stuck making a generic survival game that I've kind of seen about another 5 to 6 different ways. Like, I'm not joking about this. It was very much you spawn near the coast, you spawn randomly on the map, and it looks like you're trying to run around, but there is kind of like, oh, there's base building and there's buildings to loot, but it wasn't like unique. Nothing stood out to me within the first 10 minutes of this is actually a game I want to keep playing. I kept playing it because I want to do the research for the podcast, but meh.
It felt like kind of a combination of elements of DayZ and Rust for me. Like the sense of the base, like the bases looked very much like Rust bases. You know, they had the storage container that kept your base. If you kept materials in it, it kept your base build up. It kept it there. But the wandering around from town to town and just wandering over long distances of potentially nothing happening kind of reminded me of DayZ. The interesting take for me was the fact that it being called Deadside, I thought I was going to be fighting zombies again. I thought it was going to be another zombie survival game, but it isn't. It ends up being I guess it's like a war torn country, a war torn land, and there's just bandits all over the place, and you'll randomly come upon bandit settlements, or there'll be a town full of bandits and stuff like that. So you're fighting actual humans with guns. You're not fighting the undead in this game.
Yeah, I did notice that, and I did come across a couple of them. I think I took out like 20 to 30 of them, and I took out a couple of players who were fighting some of them, but I didn't necessarily like, I think they're supposed to trick you into believing that they're possible players or groups of players, right? Like, that's the idea, I think. But they never came across that way. The AI is very clunky. They have a hard time moving around. And oh my God, do not get me started on how freaking loud the footsteps are. I literally had a guy looting a house probably about 100 to 200 meters away from me, and he sounded like he was right next to me while he was looting. It's nice that they have directional sound so I could tell what direction he was, but like I felt like he was on top of me even though he was 200 meters away. Like I don't get why the footsteps in this game are so loud and so loud so far away. It just doesn't make sense to me.
See, I had a little bit of a different experience at first with the AI because the first NPCs I encountered them before I was prepared and while they were a long way off. So I got killed relatively quickly and thought maybe that was players because again, I'm expecting the undead. So I geared up, went back towards this house, and when I ended up taking out the guys that were there, I realized really quickly these can't be players because that was too easy. Like the only way these guys are going to take me out is if I'm either unprepared and I don't have any weapons, or there's more of them than I expected and they overwhelm me. So I quickly realized that I wasn't fighting players; I was fighting NPCs in the game, which was cool. There, it was a different take, like I said, than fighting zombies. Was interesting to me, but it did get kind of monotonous very quickly in that aspect because no matter where I was, the fighting of those NPCs was relatively similar. The only difference is the number of them or the terrain they're in or the different buildings they're in and searching for them. As for your footsteps comment, not only are the other characters and NPCs footsteps insanely loud, your footsteps are insanely loud. There was so many times where I would stop in the middle of the road and look around me because I'm walking and I'm hearing my own footsteps and I'm like, my footsteps shouldn't be that loud. Somebody's got to be coming up close to me. And I'm turning and looking. Not only that, you want to talk about sounds. I don't know if you how many vehicles you came across in the game, but I got several
None.
motorcycles and saw other vehicles in the game. those things are loud. I could hear a motorcycle coming towards me from across the map.
You know what the kicker of all this is, folks? My complaint about loud footsteps and everything else, kind of like that mentions, I wasn't wearing any shoes when I first spawned, and I sounded like I was walking around in like 10-pound boots on like grated metal, like you would hear like in an industrial area or something, right? It was just obnoxiously loud. Now, the graphics in the game I would have to say they're okay. They're not amazing. They're not terrible though, right? I can definitely see like it definitely has the appeal. It's not ugly. It's not a bad looking game. It's just not a very good looking game either. And I'm not a very much of a graphic person, but you really didn't have a good, I would call LOD render distance on a lot of objects, level of detail, I would say, when you got further away. Like a lot of places just became cubes and a lot of things popped in. That was one of my other annoyances was I would just see things popping in on the side of my vision as I'm playing the game, and I don't know why I'm seeing them pop in on the side of my vision.
It's interesting how different our experiences were because I didn't really notice that. What I noticed was things from a distance looked like they were going to look good until I got really close to them. And then I would start to see not necessarily the level of detail drop, but I would start to see that my perception of something that's way off in the distance is different when I got close to it. It looks better before I get close to it and start noticing the impurities and the clipping in of things. Walking into a building and seeing a couple of planks of wood and then seeing the grass clipping through it, so the grass is sticking up through the wood floor, that kind of thing.
We can't talk about the graphics and what you're talking about without actually talking about the frames per second that I got. I got anywhere from like 90 to 110 frames per second. So optimization wise, it wasn't bad. I was playing on the highest settings. So like again, not a bad optimized game, not the prettiest game either, but definitely not ugly. I have to say though, learning how to play this game was weird. It felt very kind of backwards. Like there was a lot of lack of quality of life and it wasn't very intuitive to learn. Like I just I didn't necessarily struggle, but there were a lot of things that didn't necessarily make a lot of sense to me.
You My thing about it was you didn't really have to learn the quality of life stuff. There's enough loot and stuff in the game that you can find or take from the NPCs that you find and fight, at least in the server I played, that I didn't have to worry about building a base until I decided like, hey, I want to build this base in order to do research for the podcast. I didn't have to worry about building storage containers. Like none of that mattered. I did very little crafting in the game too because I didn't really need anything other than a campfire and a backpack. I think I crafted the axe, a campfire, and a backpack. I think that's the three things I crafted before I decided to try to build a base. Once I started building the base, I had to craft, storage units and a hammer and things like that. But there wasn't really a need for the other things, which I thought was weird for me because I was playing a player versus everything server and I wasn't really struggling to survive again, except for when I got overwhelmed by the NPCs.
Well, yeah, and I think you're kind of right about that. I went along with the tutorial, and what I'm talking about is it's like it doesn't really tell you how to make anything medical. It doesn't really give you any kind of direction, which is fine. But then when you start looking into it, it's all like, wait, I got cloth in my hand, but how do I make the rags? And then you end up finding out that you have to like be holding a knife and looking at the rags on the floor to be able to do it. You can't do it inside your inventory. That's kind of what I was talking about. But yeah, I mean, like the game was easy. Let's face it. When it comes to outside of PVE with the NPCs and with PvP with players, I didn't really have trouble surviving at all. I didn't even think about it. It was not even on my radar. Honestly, I think this is a game that survival is such a back burner thought for the game development that the only reason why they call it survival is because you may have to tend to your wounds and stuff after getting into a firefight.
So it's there. Those survival elements are there. They're built into the game. They're just not necessarily focused on. At least I didn't feel like they were focused on enough to make it difficult.
I
Daisy,
mean, you're
we're
right.
running around starving to death because you can't find food, you can't find loot. You know, the new map we talked about last time, you got frozen food. This game, it's like there's food everywhere. You can find food, you can find guns, you can find axes, and just about every house you go in, the loot is relatively abundant, at least on the server I was playing.
Again, it felt kind of like there's weapons everywhere, there's food everywhere, there's everything everywhere. I didn't get into the base building much, but I can tell you, I felt like the base building was one of the only things that took the most to get into. Like, I just found guns all the time and food all the time. But base building wise, I didn't find a lot of that stuff all the time.
Well, here's the thing about the base building. I'll address the animations here in a second, but speaking of base building specifically, build your base. Start with a like a stick base or a brick, yeah, a stick base or a twig base. Start with that and build it next to a bush because or a tree because those don't go away as you're hacking away with at them with an axe. I built my entire base, which I didn't complete because I messed something up, but I built my entire base just by hacking at one bush or one tree and just continually getting branches from that one thing because it never goes away. I harvested probably 1,000 sticks from that one tree and it
Oh,
disappeared.
wait. You built an entire base from one tree?
Yes. Well, I built almost an entire base.
Wow. Just wow.
Yeah,
Like what?
I kept hacking away at it, expecting it to disappear, and it just was an unlimited amount of resources from that one tree. And I I don't think that was a glitch. I think that was is the way it's meant to be, but it's very strange to me, and it makes me wonder if you can get other resources that way.
That. I think overall this game may have potential, but I definitely feel like I went into this thinking that the 1.0 release that I've seen so much media about was going to be like a very different game because I played Dead Side before and it wasn't. It was a game that had a little bit more polish on it and stuff, but it was essentially the same game I played in the past and it didn't impress me.
I don't know. It just the world felt dead to me. The world felt empty. Maybe that's why they call it Dead Side. I don't know, but it felt empty. It felt like it needed something else. I got to the point where I wanted to move on to the next mission and go try a mission out and I would have to just find a vehicle and drive for 15 20 minutes to get to something that was interesting or to get to somewhere where I could have a battle. And in the meantime, the crossing of all of that land and the crossing of that map, I wasn't worried about surviving. That's the difference in I keep bringing up DayZ, but that's the difference in walking down the road in DayZ for 15 20 minutes is you're worried about survival. Am I going to find a house before I make it to the next town before I starve to death so I can find a can of tuna so that I can survive for 10 more minutes. This game is just like, all right, well, I can drive across the map no problem. I can walk across the map no problem because I'm not going to starve to death.
Well, folks, that is our first impressions of Dead Side. Doesn't mean we won't revisit this game and take another stab at it with a better deep dive into it, but that is our first impressions right now. Thank you very much for watching the State of Survival. Join me in thanking Dimension 119 and Red Falcon for being here and giving us all the support. If you wish to support us, try becoming a member. We always put our videos out a little bit early for our members. Thank you for watching the State of Survival. To top for now.
See you in another dimension.